Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. I'm Julia Kelleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate. And in each episode, we sit down with the top minds and leaders from across the nation to share their perspectives that can help advance FSE's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and elevate school board leaders across our communities. And today, we are so lucky to be joined by Leroy Tre Hutchins. I met Trey through Yvonne Johnson, who, as you know, also works with us. They were at a PTA event, and he brings two things that I think are really, really important. One, some real practical, hands-on, lived experience with this work, and then a strategic focus. And I think when you approach school governance with that kind of practical boots on the ground and a strategic focus, it's a fantastic combination. He's currently serving as a school board member in District 3 in Cobb County in Georgia and Atlanta. He's been a consistent voice for equity, community engagement, and fiscal responsibility for one of the largest school districts in the country. So whether he's advocating for how Black and Brown students need to have equitable access or speaking out in debates at board meetings, his approach is always grounded in his values, and he's driven by action. So he brings today all of that experience with us, but his background in education, his MBA, and the communities that he serves just is going to give us a wealth of experience and knowledge about how this change in school systems work. So Trey, thank you so much at this moment in time for being with us. I know you're very, very busy and you dedicated time to be here. So thank you for being willing to support Delaware.
It's absolutely my privilege and my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I thought we could start. You have such a neat perspective in Georgia because in this era of political polarization, and especially given the way that boards work in Georgia, which we should talk a little bit about that so that the community has an orientation. But you're seeing all of these shifts at the federal level, and what does it mean for states? What does it mean for locals? So could we just talk about what it's like to lead in a moment like now?
Yes, a very unique experience, specifically here in Cobb County. Cobb County, we're just right outside the metro Atlanta area. I actually border Atlanta, and we're the last we're the last partisan board in metro Atlanta. So we're governed by Republicans and Democrats, and we run on those tickets. And so we're starting to see how that shapes us when at the federal level, the Republican president is, in my opinion, and this is the opinion of my Republican colleagues, attacking public education. And so to see us come together around public education and how we secure the future of public education here in Cobb County, we've actually come together and locked hands, and it's just interesting to see how they separate themselves from some of that ideology at the national and the state level as well.
Yeah. So what does the shifts bring? The shifts in federal policy, the court rulings, and how do they show up in your boardroom, and how has it changed? What is it like, this year versus what it was last year?
Yeah. What's funny is it always shows up when it comes to money, when it comes to our budget, our bottom line. And so with a $1.8 billion budget, the federal is not a very large portion. And specifically, just recently in the state of Georgia, several of our programs were being held by the federal government or the federal Department of Education. And so roughly for Georgia, for Cobb County specifically, $7 million of that was on hold. And so, whether it be after school program, whether it be Title I money, $7 million, while it may not bankrupt the Cobb County School District, it will still be a hit, specifically for the portion of the county in which I govern, which is all Black and Brown children, all Title I schools. And so to see my colleagues, all of us come together and say, regardless of what the federal government does, locally as a school district, we're going to make sure we cover and we fill those gaps.
Yeah, so what the budget for your school district is?
$1.8 billion.
1.8 billion. So just to points of comparison, right, for scope and size, the state of Delaware's investment for all 19 districts is 3.5 billion, and our
Wow.
schools are mostly around, in the hundreds of millions, which is a lot of money, but you've got a whole extra zero there, you know what I mean? So that's a lot of money to be responsible for. And
Yes,
even so, though, I want to point out that $7 million meant something because
that's
it
right.
was directed for a particular set of programs. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And those programs are specific to the area in which I govern specifically.
Wow. Interesting. And let's talk a little bit more about the demographic too of your district, where you said
Okay.
all it's all minority
Yes.
students. It's all Black and brown students. And
Yeah.
what have been some of those challenges in leading and being responsive to the community? And I say challenge because in a lot of ways, many minority communities have been underserved traditionally, right? Historically, the way that the structural things have played out in America. They didn't, certain communities didn't benefit from what is a free public education. So you're actually focused on in a district leading an equity charge, trying to make sure that every child gets a chance to succeed, and you're doing it with a population that has been traditionally underserved. What
Yes.
what does that require?
Strategy. A lot of strategy.
Uh-huh.
Especially in the world where there's buzzwords around equity and things like that, where you can't say certain words because it
Right.
means something different to different people.
Yeah.
Having to navigate that and be strategic about using data and always being data driven, but making sure we're using the
Mhm.
data in a way to where we do not alienate ourselves from the resources that we need. Um,
Mhm.
with our district being all Black and brown, but it's also all Title One. All of our schools in my
Mhm.
post receive Title One funding, which means they sit at a certain economic level in which the federal
Mhm.
government has identified that we need to provide additional resources. The
Mhm.
high school that I graduated from 35 years ago is now a Title One high school that receives $1 million annually just to help
Wow.
support the academics of that one high school. And um, and
Mhm.
so uh, and so that's what we're talking about when well, now these funds may not come to us. What do we do?
Right.
How do I have that conversation with my
Yeah.
colleagues? Say,
Right.
while the federal government may not invest, will we take the stance of still investing out of our general fund,
Mhm.
out of our rainy day funds, to ensure that we are
Mhm.
still providing the same quality and level of education that we need to see the growth academically that we're used to seeing.
Right.
And so
Right.
you just have to be strategic and keep it in a way to where it's not polarizing, but it also allows us to continue to provide the support that's needed based on the data.
Right, right. I was gonna touch on that, the data being very important and looking at a strategic investment. I mean, that's something that we at FSE really think that it's critically important. Delaware is gonna change its funding formula, and I
Mhm.
think, you know, more money isn't a solution
Yes,
if there's not an intentionality behind how the money is invested,
that's
right? I mean, and I think that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that if there's going to be a gap, what does that gap mean? And then how do we meet those needs? But that's a very specific interpretation of these dollars we're going to do this function because this function is needed in this environment. And if
yep,
that resource isn't applied, what are we going to do?
absolutely. I remember last year in our last legislative session, um, there was a really big push for the poverty weight,
Hmm.
changing our state formula on how we fund schools and teachers and educators.
Hmm.
And there was a push because our formula hasn't been changed since like the 80s. So it's been like almost 40 years and there's been no
Oh,
change to
wow.
our formula. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
there's a push that's saying, well, how do we provide resources for those districts, rural or metro, to make sure that they're receiving what they need? And so they decided that poverty would be the metric that they could um, coalesce on, because whether you're in rural or metro, you all have this population. And
Sure.
so, but when you start saying we're going to pull resources for poverty, you have
Mhm,
some colleagues that have a problem with that, right? So
mhm,
we had
mhm.
to change language to opportunity weight. This is
Mm,
not a poverty
mhm,
weight. This is an opportunity weight. How do we
mhm,
support those that
mhm.
need more support based on the data? And so just
Right.
being strategic about some of those things so that we make sure that we continue to have a seat at the table and not get excluded from the conversations in the room.
Yeah, that strategic use of language, I think it's brilliant. There are certain conversations where if certain words are said, I think the
Yes,
whole idea gets lost because we
that's right.
get sort of locked into what does that mean. But when you do it based on principle, or if you do it with an approach, or you do it kind of logically without certain words, I think people can get behind the idea
That's right.
a little bit easier.
That's right.
But but I will say, you must have some secret, because you've been quite effective on the board, and so there's got to be a way that there's leadership that you're doing too, to try to build that coalition, to try to get the board to consensus, which, because if you can't reach consensus, you can't really govern effectively.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've learned a long time ago, we don't do this work in silos. Um,
Mhm.
I do it with the full support of the community behind me. So when there's opportunities for us to have town halls, they're packed. The room is packed. And it's not just packed with people in my district, it's packed with people and community leaders, families from all around the entire county.
Mhm.
Even the work that I do now, I focus on a lot of my work with the Chamber of Commerce and making sure that I'm
Hmm.
supporting all of Cobb County and the health of Cobb County, and not just the
Mhm.
southern portion of the county. And so when we start talking about all of Cobb and making all of Cobb great, that also
Mhm.
includes this area as well. So by proxy, the southern portion gets
Mhm.
what they need when you have a
Yeah.
more holistic approach. And that's what I've done. I've started looking at
Mhm.
what we do. Even though I'm elected to a certain area, I'm elected to the southern portion of the
Mhm.
county. I still govern and I make decisions for all 106,000 students and
Right.
19,000 employees that serve the entire Cobb County School District. And so,
Right.
when you take that approach and you stop siloing your conversations, it becomes
Mhm.
very helpful, very productive. I spend most of my
Yeah.
time fielding conversations and fielding issues and challenges with the community, and 90% of them do not live in the area I'm elected to. They live in
Oh.
the remaining parts of Cobb County. Yeah.
Interesting. That's
Mhm.
really interesting. I would agree with this. For the holistic approach is useful, and your leadership skills, clearly you've been quite effective on the board. But also, do you think your background in advocacy, and maybe we could share a little bit with the
Absolutely.
you know the our audience who may not have these, you come from a world of advocacy, and you know that, and then you've been able to just really make this incredible transition, understanding which hat you're in. When does the advocacy part happen, and how's Trey showing up when he's doing that, and then when you're being a board member, and what does governance need to look like?
Absolutely. I've had to learn many hats. And sometimes I
Mm.
have to take the hat off in the middle of a sentence and put another hat on. But um, when I first started in this work, it was because I have children in elementary school. They were starting kindergarten and they weren't getting what they needed out of that experience. And so
Mhm.
I only did what I remember watching my parents did. My parents were PTA presidents when I was
Oh,
growing up.
okay.
And so
Uh-huh.
I said, "Oh, I'm going to go ahead and join the PTA because that's where I'm going to be able to
Mhm.
talk to the principal. I'll be able to get engaged and I'll be able to help." And so by process, I got on the board. I started doing all the PTA work, and our principal pulled me to the side and she said, "I may need you on school council." And school council is not necessarily the fundraising or the nonprofit or the advocacy arm. It's more of the governing arm for the school. And so you sit
Mhm.
on this very selective group of parents and teachers to help frame the future of that school. And do you want STEM programming, or do you want art integration, or this is what the data is saying for our schools, and how do we put together a plan of work to improve outcomes in this area? And so this group was more detailed and more governing. It was when I
Mhm.
got on that committee, I learned that, oh, there is a difference between advocacy and governing. And
Mhm.
so what I've had to learn to do is take the advocacy and bring it to the governing table, because the advocacy
Mhm.
allowed me to get the data and how to use
Mhm.
the data in a compelling way to get the outcome that we're looking for.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I started serving at the PTA level over 28 local elementary and middle and high schools in my area.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Mhm.
from that engagement with those parents and those teachers in those schools, they all requested that I serve on the school board.
Mhm.
And so as a result, when the time came, I served on, I ran for election. I did not have an opponent. Most people had already decided this was going to be the person. And so I took
Mhm.
my PTA advocacy and I took what I've learned from those school councils and governing is I said, well, you know what? Now it's time to serve in a greater capacity, and I've done that with the school district now. And so when it's time to advocate, I know how to effectively do it in our board meetings. When it's time to really push and get some of the things done that I need to get done,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has helped me to create other advocates within my community, having
Sure.
town halls, having training classes on how to advocate and how to have your
Mm-hmm.
voice heard at the table and how
Yeah.
to get a seat at the table. And so we have public comment, we have town halls, and now I have a group of parents that come prepared and ready to advocate and ready to speak on behalf of the community. And it is my job
Mm-hmm.
to just megaphone. I let them speak, but then I kind of,
Right.
all in, and then I hold people accountable to it, and I hold my other elected officials
Mm-hmm.
accountable to it. And so,
Yeah.
yes, it is great work in having both components because they work
Mm-hmm.
together seamlessly. You can get a lot more done that way.
Yep. I love this example, and we're gonna push this, I mean, out through all our socials and whatnot, but particularly to our ambassadors. FAC started an ambassador program, which is really
Yeah.
trying to institutionalize. We were fortunate to get local foundation funding for it, and we want to elevate the voice of local leadership, parents, community members who do care, who do have great perspectives, who do have ideas on the solutions, but what they need is a channel, and they need a place, and they need a stage, and they need this kind of support like you're describing. So congratulations. I think that's a great example.
And I'll tell you, as a school board member, when I ran, I said to the community, I'm not going to do this by myself. This is not,
Hmm.
you're not asking me to do that. I am only going to do this with your help. And so I have a fellowship of sorts where I have a parent group. Also have a student group, and then I have a community group that I meet with monthly. Give them the
Hmm.
issues, give them things that are happening at the board level, but then they also bring me what's happening in the community, what's happening at the schools
Hmm.
locally. Because
Right.
once you become a school board member, you're not operational. You're really
Hmm.
is you
Hmm.
hire someone to run operations. And so what
Yep.
policies do we need around school safety? What
Hmm.
policies do we need around lunch programs and making sure children are
Hmm.
fed and things of that? And so I'm
Hmm.
hearing from parents directly, I'm hearing from the community directly, I'm hearing from students directly, and I make sure that I carve out once a month for those three groups so that we can engage and continue having conversations so that their voice is
Hmm.
always.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example. Thank you so much. This is just invaluable. Because you can read about it. You can, you know, somebody can tell you a story from someone, but it's so different when you hear it from a person who's done it. You know what I mean? And I just really appreciate you sharing this with us. It's fabulous. So I want to switch a little bit to sort of one part I wanted to cover in the show is, you know, you've been successful, but
Mhm.
I'm sure there's been challenges along the way, right? So what's kind of one of the big challenges, or what, like a maybe sort of a moment in time when things didn't go exactly as planned, and more important than sort of how it shook out, but what'd you learn from that challenging moment?
Um, well, again, let me go back to the point that we are a partisan board. And
Mhm.
Democrats, that I'm a Democrat, so the Democrats, we are in the minority, right? And our
Mhm.
Republican colleagues, they're in the majority, so they have set policies and procedures in place that benefit them. um, there was a time when the our school board policy would allow that with the advice of three board members, any item could be placed on the agenda. So
Okay.
say I talk about school safety, I would send a request to the chairman and to the superintendent and say, hey, can we talk about school safety? These are the measures that I want to talk about. Can you add this
Mhm.
to our next month's agenda? At that
Mhm.
point, they would decide if that's appropriate or not.
Okay.
They would say, well, great, we're not going to talk about it next month. And I say, well, do you plan to talk about it? They would say, no, we don't want to
No.
talk. So then they would come back to me and I would say, well, let me go grab two other school board members that would agree that this should be placed on the agenda, and then it would be placed on the agenda. Well, we
Mhm.
did that for about a year. And then when they realized now that we have three Democrats on the board, remember, this is the first time ever. This has been a Republican board with one Democrat for well
I
over 16.
see.
So now
Uh-huh.
that we have three Democrats, the rule says we can always get something on the agenda now. And so
Right.
what they did was they unilaterally changed the policy so that you would need four board members to put something on the agenda now versus the rule of three. And
Oh, wow.
so now we are back to where we can't get anything on the agenda based on that. So what I've done is I've been strategic about working with um, people in other parts of the county in other posts with
Mm-hmm.
certain issues that I feel are important, that are also important to them. And then I have them go work with their school board members to bring the issue forward. And so they pressure and they keep on advocating until their board member brings the item forward. And by proxy, I'm able to participate in that conversation at the board level.
Interesting.
And so that's how I'm able to navigate some of those more challenging times where, again, I want to talk about school safety. In
Mm-hmm.
my post specifically, we had a shooting. We had a school shooting where two people were injured with guns showing up on campus, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the first time. We're starting to see a trend of guns showing
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk about, well, what technology is out there available, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
um, metal detectors, but what technology is out there. What are some of the things
Mm-hmm.
that we can do from a board level and from a budgetary standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I could not get them to discuss it because for them it's political. We're in a gun
Right.
carrying state, So
Right.
that would limit access to guns and things of that nature. They didn't even want to broach a conversation
Sure.
that would look to that.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I had to leverage other people to help us get their elected officials to the table to have that
Mm-hmm.
conversation.
Yeah. It kind of goes
It
back.
worked.
It reminds me a little bit about this holistic approach,
Yeah,
you're trying to include everyone. And
that's
it's really a fascinating example because most times when under pressure, what people try to do is sort of marginalize or separate out. And I think if I'm understanding right, you're saying you've been able to accomplish more by finding a way for everyone to contribute in some way to this conversation that in some ways sort of flattens that hierarchy and balances out the power dynamic.
absolutely. When the shooting happened at my high school, it became my issue, right? But then when
Right.
I pulled the data and I recognized that, well, guns have shown up in this district and guns have shown up in
Mhm.
that district, while that did not result in an actual school shooting, we do have data that shows guns are showing up in all of our schools. Weapons are
Right.
showing up in all of our schools. So how do we
Right.
address the data overall? And how do we all
Yep.
have consensus on how we're going to make school safety our number one
Mhm.
priority as a board,
Mhm.
not as just Tre Hutchins and Post 3?
Exactly. So if I'm this is a great point, and I want to before I go to this, I want to talk a little bit about the Brown project. I don't know if it was connected to the
Yes.
shooting example, but before we go there, just a question about this last example. It's almost like in a lot of ways you were able to create or leverage collective voice in doing what you did, right? And you were allowing the board to sort of like you just said, it wasn't Tre Hutchins' issue. This is a community issue. This is an issue that
That's,
affects a lot of people, and you're kind of giving space for them.
that's right. That's right. And, when election time comes around, you now have your board member has voted on an issue or they
Yeah.
strategically blocked the issue. And so now you can
Right.
make those decisions on how you want to move
Yeah.
forward with that particular representative when the time comes.
Yeah. But can I just? And again, I know I'm just so fascinated. But how'd you learn that? I mean, how did that become sort of a way that you learned to navigate?
I'm a former pastor, or I like to call it a recovering pastor. I pastored a church
Okay.
for about 5 years, and just in that process, I realized that I had to get rid of my ego. It's not about
Mm,
Tre and what Tre wants to get done, and I
mhm,
had to put other people forward first, and put other people
mhm.
and their concerns ahead of mine. And as a result of
Yeah.
that, if you lead in that mind frame, it no longer becomes
Mhm.
about Tre, about the people. And so I
Yeah.
hope that our elected officials get back to the we the people, and that we're really just the
Mm,
megaphone for the apps for the voice of the people.
yeah.
If we really start focusing back on that and not about my
Mhm.
political resume, I don't even care about it. I I
Yeah.
I just see the work done, and I don't care who gets credit
Yeah.
for it actually. And so
Right. Right.
and that's what helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's a big approach to what we take, here at First Aid Educating in Delaware. It's not about who does it. It's about that the system improves because the
Yes.
children deserve better and everybody wants it. So whoever is making whatever contribution, you know what I mean? There's more than enough work to go around. There's more than enough credit to go around, but we've got to look
Absolutely.
past kind of, yeah. So, all right, the Brown project.
Yes.
Let's tell the we don't have something like that here that I know of. So I'm sure the audience would be really curious to understand what it is
Wow.
and
Yeah.
how it's related.
Good. So the Brown versus the Board of Education, that historical landmark of an education
Mhm.
initiative. Well, there is a cohort of people here, a nonprofit that is actually studying the effects of Brown versus Board of Education and the effects
Mm-hmm.
of it, positive or negative. It's interesting. We were studying Martin Luther King and his, his take on integration and things of that nature, and segregation as a result. And it was funny, toward the end of his life, he had made a statement that he felt like his efforts was walking his people into a burning building. And
Wow.
and we're talking about integration at this point. While we were
Mm-hmm.
fighting for integration, and he recognized that integration may not be everything that we hoped and wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the challenge. And so now this Brown versus Education looks at what happened as a result of Brown versus the Board of
Mm-hmm.
Education. Did it actually
Mm-hmm.
benefit us? And have we actually even completed the vision of Brown versus the Board of Education as it relates to segregation? There are still places that are
Mm-hmm.
still segregated today. And so
And
my conversation with those people is, I have to look at it on both sides.
mm-hmm.
As demographic shifts change, as communities change, this is always going to be a running conversation, because
Mm-hmm.
30 years ago, this was not a conversation. 30 years
Mm-hmm.
later,
Mm-hmm.
it is a conversation, but we're talking about a historical record at this point that
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
now relevant in certain areas that it was not relevant back then.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
great organization. I'm glad that they're actually studying this, because the ball is always, and the goalpost, as they say, is always moving as a
Right.
result of this.
So this is also related to data, which is a really strong through line with the conversation with you. They're looking at sort of what has happened, right? What policies, what practices, what effects have they had on different subgroups of students comparatively? How did white students compare to the performance of Black and brown students?
Absolutely. So when we start talking about integration, we automatically go to Atlanta Public Schools, which is right in the heart of Atlanta. We all know that Atlanta is also the hub of the civil rights movement. And so we look at how Atlanta, when we talk about it, we always talk about how Atlanta integrated schools. As a result of the integration of public schools in the city of Atlanta, we started seeing what we call white flight. Whites that
Mhm.
actually occupied all these areas in Atlanta now moved to the suburbs. Cobb County is one of those suburbs,
Mhm.
and as well as their political influence and things of that nature, moved to the suburbs. And Atlanta was left at 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 what I would consider underappreciated at this point,
Mhm.
because most of the resources left as well. And so
Mhm.
now you see Atlanta trying to rebuild, even today, rebuild where they are
Mhm.
educationally. So
Mhm.
you have places like Cobb County that began to flourish, places like Gwinnett County and Fulton County that flourished.
Mhm.
Um, and so we start looking at, well, what happened, and how did we get here?
How do
So
we get
then
here?
when
Right.
counties such as Cobb County and counties such as Fulton County, you started seeing that divide of north and south, because now the southern
Mhm.
portion had demographics started to shift and change. What
Mhm.
are we doing
Mhm.
differently, or what are we doing the same that's causing this demographic to not perform as well as that demographic? And so
Mhm.
the Brown Project allows us to really delve into what is that one thing that causes some subgroups to perform better than others. And
Mhm.
is it just economics? Is that the answer? Or is it
Mhm.
our policy? And so I think it's a great project. It's a great initiative to look at data and how you look at data, and also how you look
Yep.
at your policy.
Yep. And it sounds like, I mean, it's a fascinating project. I applaud you sort of digging in and leaning in and trying to get a handle on that. And then once you learn, making that available information and knowledge available to others. But it does for me sort of call out a point, and I want to check this with you and see what you think, and maybe we can end on this because it'll be really really powerful for me to get this at the end of my show. Um, it sounds like it was a way of professional learning. It was development. It's information. It's looking at trying to see what policies make sense for what reasons to make more informed decisions. So it sounds like it was a form of professional development and learning for the boards.
Knowledge is power. And again, when you're a data driven decision making body, you can only use the
Hmm.
data to make the decisions. Take the emotions out. Let's just look at what we
Sure.
have here. Um, when I
Hmm.
started looking at the data, I had some colleagues, the Democrat colleagues, that wanted to look at the disproportionality as it relates to Black and brown children. Well, that automatically was a non-starter for my colleagues. Well, let's just look at data in general in regards to just the discipline. Are we expelling children more in certain schools than we are in other schools? What are we expelling them for?
Yes, well, you can confirm that for me, but I'm going to lean towards yes.
Exactly. So how do we drill down to determine the root cause of why and where is it coming from? And as a result of that, principals were able to now look at their data and determine what teachers are sending referrals forward. And then they were able to help professionally develop those teachers. Maybe you need classroom management. We also started seeing the conversation around culturally competent training and culturally competent teaching. If I had a room, this is a quick story. I had a teacher of the year, probably one of the best teachers. She's still teaching. I love her to this day. She is an African-American woman, and she got an ESOL endorsement. And so she had a classroom full of English language learning students that didn't look like her. They speak Spanish, and she's a loud Black woman. So when she's talking to the class, if you can hear me, clap one. She's doing all the things she knows to do that they taught her in classroom management. She was having her conference week, and one of the Hispanic moms came in and he said, I appreciate everything you're doing. My child is learning. She says, however, there's one thing I just want to bring to your attention. My child comes home scared every day. Like there's some anxiety that she's picked up, and we keep trying to figure out what at school is giving you anxiety. And she says, your class is very loud. You're very loud. And the tone of your voice, it gives them anxiety. And she was like, immediately took offense. Like, what are you talking about?
People say that. People say that to me too.
All the things, the elevated voice, everything happened right there. And the mother just stopped and said, that is exactly what I'm talking about right there. And, the teacher called the child over. Come here. Don't we have a great relationship? And she's trying to move her. The child is like frozen at this point. And she was gracious enough to take a step back and look at the whole situation. And she says, you know what? You're right. Everything that I learned to do, I realize it doesn't work in this classroom setting because I'm teaching a demographic of students that is not how it works at their house. The parents don't yell at their kids. In Black households, they're yelling at the kids and it's all in love. But again, we're very loud, passionate people. This doesn't work in that group. And so she had to relearn her classroom management style, her teaching style, to get everything she needed to those kids in an environment where they felt safe to learn. And so that's a prime example of how we had to start looking at how we do things differently to get the best outcome from students. And again, not about the teacher and her ego. It's about, you know what? It's about that child and what I can provide for that child.
Amazing. That's a fabulous story. Tre, it's been such a pleasure. The insights you've shared regarding the strategic investment in money, the use of data to make these decisions, how to use language more effectively to prevent people from getting polarized, and this holistic approach to looking at who are all the actors here and how do we bring them together, and how is sort of the advocacy and engagement of the community something that really should inform what you said is, we the people. Is it the voice of the people? So absolute pleasure. Congratulations on your leadership. I wish you continued success. I think you're doing a great job, and a wonderful example for us to have here in Delaware to connect nationally. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Okay. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining for another episode of Leading Together Podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. We will see you soon.